Onde Magnetique OM1 is the brainchild of Scott Campbell, who's a musician, photographer, graphic designer, all sorts of creative things from New Orleans in the United States. Here you can see a record of his I bought on limited edition cassette tape and art booklet back in 2016. It's an absolutely lovely thing, this. And you can also see on his YouTube channel how he makes some of this music, some of the techniques and tools that he uses. Obviously there's the Onde Magnetique website as well, where you can find out more about this synthesizer, stroke sampler, and if you're very, very lucky, order it. But if you really want to order one after watching here, the best way to do that is to sign up to the mailing list and to follow the Instagram page that he's set up for it. In this, I guess it's sort of a review, I run through quite a few different demos in different genres, from sort of breakbeat to banging hardcore to ambient and sound design, just because I think it's worth pushing different genres with the same instrument rather than just sticking to ambient, which is what most people use it for. And I run through some of the sort of quirks and features. So here's the OM1 setup and ready to play. The OM1's best thought of as a mono and monophonic analog sampler. It's a bit like the old school 90s digital samplers. You put in a sound, you pitch it up and down, and that pitching up and down is the same as changing the speed. The main difference here that the samples or patches are stored on cassette tapes. The most famous tape-based instrument is probably the Mellotron. That uses a strip of tape for every key. Obviously it weighs as much as a car and is pretty impractical. And you can get all kinds of software and digital emulations of it now too, but if you've ever had the chance to play one in real life or hear it even turned on, it's quite an experience. It makes a lovely sort of motor sound. You can hear the tapes crumpling through the readers. It's pretty incredible. So the Onde Magnetique OM1 is inspired by a thing called the Ondes Martenot, which is a fascinating instrument. I've linked a couple of YouTube videos to it in the description, but it's a sort of very analog experience, and that's what this is kind of recreating in a smaller, more humble version.
So he developed a mechanism that controlled the pitch by placing your finger inside a ring that's attached to a wire. To change the pitch, you slide your finger up and down, with indentations on the wooden frame giving you tactile and visual feedback where you were. The piano keyboard was originally there only as a guide, but on later models you could also play the keyboard itself, which rather fantastically wiggles left to right to allow you to play vibrato. If only we could have this on the piano. The left hand is in charge of the volume and the attack of notes.
Now, while the Mellotron, as I mentioned, has a different piece of tape for every key containing a recording of that note, and it has 3 tracks on each piece of tape, which give you the 3 instruments, and it switches over entire racks of tapes to change instruments. The OM1 relies on speeding up and slowing down the tape, which you're playing here, to create the different pitches. And to change instruments, you just swap the tape. So there you'll be able to see the tape turning at different speeds to create different pitches. So when you order the OM1, you can either order it with just the tape deck and the control box. There's 2 different tape decks, a Panasonic and a Sony. There's mild functional differences between the 2, but essentially you're getting the same experience. You can see the cassette deck's been modified to have a pitch input control jack here near the volume wheel. You can also order this pitch control strip as well. And you can order the full pack of tape patches if you like, and you can see here there's loads and loads of those if you do choose to order that. And they're quite varied, and it's just really fun to be able to plug and play like that. This is just a sped up little unboxing, because I know some people like that sort of thing. So you can see all the stuff that comes with the full pack. This is if you get the slider and the tapes. There's this really nice postcard you get with it as well, which is your instruction manual. You can power the tape deck from batteries or from its own jack input. I'm using this USB to AA adapter that I got from eBay, plugged into a USB multi-out. It has this brilliant warning on the side, do not open it. I mean, obviously the temptation is to open it now, isn't it? You have to press play on the tape to get any sound because the tape is producing the sound. There's 2 ways to play. You can play entirely manually or assisted by a sequencer, either a hardware one like I've got here, or sequencing in a DAW. In this case, the DAW is sending USB MIDI to this, which is converting it to CV and gate, control voltage and gate, which are going in here. I'm not plugged those in at the moment, but they plug in here control voltage and gate. To play manually, you have a pressure-sensitive membrane here, and the buttons that will play the speed you set on the knob above. So just like that. So this membrane is opening and shutting the gate. This knob makes the attack and release of that gate itself shorter and longer. So at the far left side it's shorter, and at the far right side it's longer, which is better for all your ambient noodling. The strip, I think, is a bit more of a sound design tool because it's kind of hard to know where your pitch is at any one time. But, you know, you could get used to it. You could mark on places where different pitches were. I'll do some demonstrations later of how you can have fun with that. But yeah, it's more of a niche use, I think. The white knobs here represent the voltage that's being sent to the tape and thus the pitch. These are very fine to adjust. If I was thinking of an OM2, I would say you should have a fine adjust knob, maybe one of these mini ones like this above for each one, just to allow you to get that really fine adjustment, because these are quite hard to get right at first, and certainly hard to use live. Maybe having a rough semitone up and down on a fine adjust above would be a really good idea. Not maybe, it would be a good idea. Anyway, these switches underneath are sort of clicky buttons, and the nature of them means that your finger can slip off and get a bit of wobbling. So listen here, let's choose a higher note, I guess. So I'm sort of warbling that by dropping the pitch in and out by basically disconnecting the button. That's a bug and a feature. If you're trying to just play a consistent note and your finger slips off, you might be annoyed. If that's true, you probably shouldn't be playing something so analog and that's designed to introduce non-linearities and strangeness to the sound. You should probably play a digital instrument that's going to just be entirely controllable. I quite enjoy the fact that you've got multiple forms of expression here. Lots of different sound design options there, and lots of musical options too. So eagle-eyed viewers will notice there's a Behringer neutron just sort of balancing across the back there. It is a working studio rather than a YouTube studio, so you're going to get things like balancing, dust, cables that don't quite look perfect, things that have been used more than once. The standard for sequencing, analog sequencing, is always volts per octave. So if you hold down function on this little thing, 1 volt, 2 volt, 5 volt per octave. For sequencing, even 1 volt though is too much for this little thing. So that's what I've done there. Is just the same as plugging this straight in. So just pretend this is plugged straight into there. Most of those notes are the same, but these knobs are all pointing in totally different directions, and that's because it's outputting too many volts. Essentially, the top pitch is reached by about halfway around this knob. What we can do to sort that out is use an attenuator. So this is running into the attenuator in and out of the attenuator, and we're just dropping the voltage that's put out. If I set one of these steps to maximum on step jump mode and just hold it, and then we attenuate down, we're just listening for the point where the pitch starts to dip. There, so that's the lowest position on the knob where we can get that highest pitch that this tape can give us. Now we have a full range of pitches. So at the moment, that's the only way I can find to really make analog sequencers function well with this, is just to calibrate it using an attenuator. It's simple to do, and it basically makes it work. So yeah, it's worth trying. Another quirk of using the SQ1 with the OM1 is the duty cycle seems to make these sort of loud pops. So I'll play a sequence here. It's not the most musical thing in the world, but it'll do for now. Duty cycle is allows the trigger to be on for less than the full step. So you'll hear that as I turn it down. But you'll notice that as I turn that down, all these sort of pops appear. So if I override the speed and just lock it to the minimum and press play, you'll have heard those quite aggressive sounding pops appear as the duty cycle shortens. I don't know what this is. It doesn't happen if you send MIDI to the SQ1 to trigger the gate alone. You don't get that popping. So it's something to do with the gate signal coming out of this. I don't really know how to fix it. I've looked around and I've not found any information on it. So at the moment I can't do it other than in post. So what I'll do now is, apply an isotope transient shaper in post just to cut that transient pop off the start, and I'll put something on the screen to show when it's on and when it's off. So there you go. That's my workaround for now. Generally, though, I don't sequence like this a lot. I tend to use the gate on the DAW MIDI, which is what you heard me doing at the start. Obviously, since this doesn't adhere to any standard sort of octave per octave system, MIDI to CV pitch doesn't work at all. I knew that was going to be the case, but it's still a bit of a shame that it doesn't. But you get what you're given. The real charm of the OM1 is it doesn't really sound like anything else. You have a idiosyncratic analog sampler to play with, which can breathe some kind of life and interest into pretty much any sound. It's simple to use in its basic form. It's actually quite hard to make it sound bad once you've really got the hang of it. But like any sort of interesting instrument, or I guess any instrument, full stop really, the basics are kind of simple, but mastering playing it entirely live is tough, and thus it's quite rewarding. That's not to say there aren't any frustrations with it. It's an analog device and it's relatively simply put together, so you have to work around some strange things. I'm a right-handed guitarist, so I'm used to fretting with this hand and doing rhythm with this hand, which is why you saw me reaching over the device to tap the membrane button in those videos. I'd like to be able to have an external one that I could tap on the right, or some way to do it with my right hand. The OM1 doesn't adhere to any kind of standard volts per octave. I've seen a video where a Sony deck is better at it with the CV. Maybe it's because that's a 2 times and the Panasonic is a 3 times. But yeah, it doesn't adhere specifically, so I had to use an attenuator to make that work properly. And also, it doesn't work with any kind of MIDI to CV pitch. That was a known aspect of the device. It's not kept a secret, but it's still a shame. It would be nice to have some kind of external box that allowed you to convert MIDI to the CV required to pick the correct pitch on the tape. That said, you can still use it for MIDI gate, which is really useful, and you saw me doing that in the introduction. The pitch knobs are very sensitive. That takes some time to get used to. I'd love to see mini knob fine adjusters above them that do like a semitone or so of voltage just to help with that. I noticed this tape deck doesn't fast forward or rewind very well at all. I don't know if that's a power supply issue or if it's just specifically to do with the way it's been modified to prioritize pitch change rather than things like rewinding and fast forwarding. So I just used an external tape deck, but that could be an issue for you if you don't have another tape deck to use. So it's just something to think about. I could also try another power supply, I guess, but it seems to be working fine for the most part. In conclusion, though, the OM1's a really fun device. I grew up with Music and Music 2000 on PlayStation, then FL Studio, which is then called Fruity Loops 3, I think it was, in the computer age. So anything that allows you to get hands-on and do some crazy things to make sounds is a bit of a bonus. It's more of a performance, and it's more enjoyable, I think. The possibilities are really limited by your imagination and the mono and monophonic nature of the device, plus the sort of 2.5 octave range you've got for notes. At the end of the day, a device like this is a bit like a sports car. Like, you either get it or you don't. If all you wanted to do is cheap commutes, a sports car just seems stupid. And I guess it's the same with something like this. If you just want to make the exact notes you want to make and you want to do that easily, then just use a plugin. But if you want this kind of device, you probably already know the sort of things you're going to get from it, and you understand what it's about. I recommend it. If you can order one, that's great if you can find one. If you can't, I'm going to go through some techniques at the end for creating similar kinds of sounds with other plugins and so on, so that you don't feel too left out. But hey, if you can get one, get one. One of my favourite synths, full stop, but definitely for this sort of music, is the Psychic Modulation Phonec 2. Here I've switched on legato and turned up the portamento mode so you can get a bit of a slide, like the motor's changing speed. It's an odd portamento because it's if you do a further distance across the keyboard, it takes way longer to slide down, which isn't quite how that tape deck behaves. It seems to speed up and slow down at roughly the same speed, regardless of where you go to, almost anyway. But you could, I guess, sort of automate the portamento across a sequence too. You could then add something like RC20, which this is just the VHS preset, and I've just sort of turned up the flux and the maybe more dropouts, turned up the magnetic. And give it some of that rough tape vibe. There's also a melt control here on the Phonec 2, which you can hear as it goes up, changes the pitch more. At the top end, it's pretty extreme. But that control's a bit of fun as well. Psychic Modulation also make Echomelt, which is, as you can see, the echo shifter's got some similar controls here. It's like a a sort of retro tape effects unit. So that gives it some of that sort of warped chorus vibe. Reels is another sort of tape plugin. This can be used to sort of crunch down the frequency range itself. There's also this plugin by my one of my favorite companies called Wavesfactory, which is called Cassette, and this is designed to emulate cassettes themselves. So as I crank up the erasures there, you get more and more artifacts. Artifacts 2. Home tape. Microtape. So you can sort of reduce the fidelity of the tape quite easily by choosing lower and lower quality versions here. It's also got a great back panel on it if you press the settings cog in the top right, where you can really specifically adjust all of these different effects, the dropouts and so on. The re-cassette mode is particularly fun. Leading to some really sort of crunchy, thick sounds. Let's just turn all of these on for the fun of it now. That might be a bit much, it might work in context. But yeah, that's just a quick example of a way that you can create some similar sounds and obviously go way, way further and more in depth. But obviously most of the examples I had in that video, I had lots of effects on the cassette synth, because effects are what makes synth sound great to my mind.